Emily Weston was the type of woman everyone recognized as soon as she walked into a room. Her presence alone commanded attention, not because of warmth or charm, but because of the icy confidence that radiated from her. Living in an extravagant mansion, in the heart of an upscale neighborhood, she considered herself far above those around her. Every aspect of her life was carefully curated, from the designer clothes she wore to the sleek, expensive car parked in her driveway. Money had always been abundant for Emily, and with that wealth came a deep-rooted sense of superiority. She had little patience for the everyday struggles of others. To Emily, those who worked in service jobs were beneath her, people to be tolerated but never respected. Waiters, cashiers, even housekeepers, they were all simply pawns in the grand game of life, mere instruments to make her world more comfortable. Her thoughts about them were always unspoken, but clear in her actions. A dismissive glance, a haughty tone, or an eye roll when they asked too many questions. It wasn't that Emily was outright cruel, at least not in the way people might expect. She knew how to smile and nod in public, always keeping up the appearance of the perfect, charming woman. But when it came to tipping, she made sure to make her opinions known. A generous tip was reserved for the rare few who truly earned it in her eyes. But even then, it wasn't about gratitude or kindness. It was always about control. On her latest trip to a luxurious restaurant, Emily prepared to indulge in the finest dishes, knowing full well that she wouldn't be paying for anything other than the food itself. She had no intention of tipping her waiter, no matter how impeccable the service. For her, it was a statement, one that made it clear she was in charge, not the people who served her. The restaurant's grand chandelier glittered above as Emily entered, the sound of polished heels echoing through the marble floors. She stood for a moment, surveying the luxurious surroundings with a smile of self-assuredness. The rich, earthy tones of the decor, the soft hum of the bustling kitchen. It was all designed to impress, and Emily was certainly impressed. She was exactly where she belonged, in a place that matched her stature. A young man, Alex, approached her with a polite smile. He was dressed in the sharp, standard attire of a waiter. A crisp white shirt, black trousers, and a neatly tied bow tie. His dark hair was combed back, and his hands were steady as he led her to her table. His youthful face, though pleasant, carried the exhaustion of someone who worked long hours just to make ends meet. Alex was a college student, doing whatever he could to pay for his education. And working at this upscale restaurant was just one of the many ways he juggled his responsibilities. But to Emily, all she saw was another lowly servant. "Here we are," Alex said smoothly, pulling the chair out for her. Emily gave a stiff nod, scanning him from head to toe with an unmistakable look of disdain. She took her seat without a word, barely acknowledging the effort he had made to ensure her comfort. As the meal progressed, Emily's attitude only grew more condescending. Every dish that was placed in front of her was scrutinized, even though the food was exquisite. The wine, imported from France, was, in her opinion, too warm. The salmon was too salty. And when Alex came to refill her glass, she couldn't help but make a comment under her breath, loud enough for him to hear. "Really? This is the best you can do?" she muttered, rolling her eyes. Alex, ever professional, merely nodded, keeping his tone courteous. "I'll be sure to bring you something else, ma'am." His patience was unwavering, even though his heart ached a little more with each dismissive word she uttered. It was clear to him that she wasn't seeing him as a person, but as a mere instrument of her own enjoyment. The final moment of tension arrived when the bill was brought to the table. Alex placed it gently in front of her, offering a polite smile. Emily's eyes immediately narrowed as she glanced at the total. "This is outrageous," she said, her voice dripping with distaste. "For this price, I could have dined in Paris." She slammed her hand onto the bill. "And I won't be tipping for this poor excuse of service." Alex's smile faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered. "I'm sorry to hear you're dissatisfied, ma'am," he said, his voice calm. Emily leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with a smug smile. "Perhaps you should learn some manners before expecting a tip," she said, barely containing her sneer. Alex nodded, but inside, he felt the sting of her words. He had done everything he could to provide excellent service, but for someone like Emily it would never be enough. He quietly left the table, pushing aside his hurt. After all, it wasn't about him, it was about her. And to her, people like him would always be beneath her. The following morning, Emily's routine unfolded as usual, with the exception of a single phone call that would change the course of her day. She was in the middle of her morning coffee, sitting by the grand windows of her living room, when her phone rang. It was her financial advisor, Daniel. "Good morning, Emily." Daniel's voice greeted, but there was a noticeable tension in his tone. "We need to talk about your investments." A chill ran through her as she set her cup down, her fingers gripping the porcelain a little too tightly. "What's wrong?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though a sense of unease crept into her chest. Daniel paused for a moment, clearly hesitating before he spoke. "The portfolio you've been heavily invested in, it's taken a significant hit. Some of the high-risk stocks have plummeted, and we're looking at a considerable loss. I recommend we adjust things, or we could lose more." Emily's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had been so careful, so meticulous in managing her wealth. Everything had been going perfectly, until now. "What are you saying?" she snapped, her pride flaring up immediately. "Are you telling me I'm losing my fortune?" "Well, yes, but with the right adjustments, we can minimize the damage," Daniel responded cautiously. "It's important to act quickly. You may need to liquidate some assets." The words hit her like a cold wave. Liquidate? She had worked so hard to accumulate everything she had, her house, her investments, her position in society. Emily couldn't even fathom the thought of losing it all. "I'll think about it," she said, trying to mask the panic in her voice. Just don't do anything drastic yet." When the call ended, Emily sat in silence, her mind racing. How could this happen to her? How could everything she had built come crumbling down so quickly? Her face, usually so composed, twisted with a mix of frustration and fear. She refused to admit it, but her confidence was wavering. This was more than just money, it was her identity. And now she was losing it. Determined to keep her composure, she quickly dialed her friends, pretending everything was perfectly fine, but deep down, her world was starting to crack. The fear of losing it all loomed large, and Emily couldn't escape the sinking feeling that it might already be too late. The following day, still reeling from the phone call with Daniel, Emily found herself pacing nervously around her house. She needed a plan. Fast. She had no idea where to start, and the thought of losing everything was unbearable. After a few calls to her friends, none of whom had much advice to offer, she decided to take matters into her own hands. The bank seemed like the best place to seek guidance on how to restructure her investments. So she put on her best everything's fine mask and made her way downtown. The bank was sleek and modern, its glass doors shining in the midday sun. Emily walked in, glancing around at the polished marble floors and the quiet, efficient atmosphere. She could almost feel the weight of the money in the air. This was where people like her were supposed to be. She made her way to the reception desk, where a young woman greeted her with a smile. "I'm here to speak with someone about my financial situation," Emily said, trying to sound confident, even as the anxiety gnawed at her stomach. "Of course, Mrs. Weston. If you'll just take a seat, someone will be with you shortly." Emily sat down in one of the plush chairs, flipping through a magazine absently as she waited. She was trying to hold on to the illusion of control when the door to one of the offices opened, and then, to her shock, she saw him. Alex. The same Alex from the restaurant. The waiter she had dismissed so harshly. Only now he was dressed in a sharp, tailored suit and a tie that spoke of wealth. His hair was neatly combed, his posture straight, exuding an air of calm authority. He walked past the reception desk, and when his eyes met Emily's, there was no mistaking the recognition in his gaze. Emily froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe it. The young man who had served her at the restaurant, the one she had looked down on so easily, was now standing before her as someone entirely different, someone powerful. "Mrs. Weston," Alex greeted her, his voice warm but with a hint of something else. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." The words felt like a slap in the face. Emily's mouth went dry as she tried to collect herself. "Alex, I didn't know you worked here," she managed, her voice faltering slightly. Her mind raced. What was going on? How could he have been the same person she had so thoughtlessly dismissed the night before? He gave her a small, polite smile, though there was something in his eyes that made her stomach churn. "I've been working here for a while now, actually," he said. His tone still respectful, but there was an edge to it. "I'm the head of investments here. My family has ties to the bank, and I'm actually in charge of a few of the accounts, including some that might be of interest to you." Emily felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks. Her mind was spinning. How could she have been so wrong about him? The young man she had so condescendingly treated was not only educated and well-spoken, but he came from an incredibly wealthy and influential family. She suddenly felt very small, her arrogance crumbling away. Alex's expression softened, though there was a quiet understanding in his gaze. "I've been working in various roles, restaurant, finance, just to learn from different perspectives," he explained. "I guess I was trying to understand the value of hard work, no matter where it came from." A pang of guilt shot through Emily's chest. She had judged him based on his job, his appearance, without knowing anything about his background. The weight of her actions crashed down on her, and she felt a flush of embarrassment that she couldn't shake. "Mr. Alex? I didn't know," Emily stammered, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. She had always prided herself on knowing everything about everyone, but here she was, completely humbled by her own ignorance. "I am sorry," Alex nodded, his smile tight but polite. "There's no need to apologize. I know it's easy to assume things about people based on what we see on the surface. But sometimes, the truth is much more complex." For a moment, Emily simply stood there, her face burning with shame. She had just realized that her world, her perfect, polished world, was not as solid as she'd once thought. Alex had proven that in the most unexpected way. "Shall we discuss your investments now?" Alex asked, his voice smooth and businesslike, as if nothing had changed. But Emily knew everything had changed. She was no longer the person who could look down on people like him, and that realization, sharp and painful, lingered in the air between them as they walked to his office. As they entered Alex's office, the sleek, modern space felt like a world apart from the luxury of the restaurant, or the grand house Emily had once called her own. The walls were lined with shelves of books and financial reports, and the large windows offered a view of the city's skyline. It was the kind of office that radiated power and success. Alex motioned for her to take a seat, and Emily did so, still trying to collect her thoughts. The realization that she had misjudged him so completely weighed heavily on her, but her pride kept her from acknowledging the full depth of it. Alex sat across from her, his expression calm, but there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. He wasn't the eager young waiter she had dismissed so easily. He was someone in control, someone who had seen the world from a perspective that was far different from hers. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat, avoiding his gaze as he began to speak. "I've worked in many places, seen many people," Alex began, his voice smooth but with an edge of quiet authority. "And one thing I've learned is that wealth is a strange thing. It comes and goes, but respect is earned through how we treat others, not by how much we have or how high we think we've climbed." Emily flinched at his words, the sting of her own arrogance suddenly too much to bear. She opened her mouth to speak, but Alex held up a hand, his tone softening but remaining firm. "I'm not here to lecture you, Mrs. Weston," he continued, "but I am going to be honest with you. My family has helped many people just like you, people who've lost sight of what really matters in the pursuit of more." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle between them. "Money isn't the only thing that can be lost in this life. Dignity, self-respect, and the respect of others, those things can vanish just as easily." Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't expected this. The young man she had dismissed so easily was now speaking truths she had long avoided. The embarrassment flooded her all at once. She had been so quick to belittle him, so sure of her own superiority, and now she saw how wrong she had been. I didn't know," Emily stammered, her voice quieter than usual. "I didn't realize—" "Most people don't," Alex interrupted gently, his expression softening just a little. "But that doesn't make it right. You've been caught up in this idea of what you should have, who you should be. But your wealth doesn't define you. How you treat people does." The words cut deeper than Emily expected, and she felt a wave of shame wash over her. She had spent so much time cultivating her image, her house, her clothes, her carefully crafted life, and now it felt meaningless, hollow. What good was all of that if she had lost her own sense of humility? Alex continued, offering her practical advice on her finances, his tone businesslike but still warm. He spoke of restructuring her investments, liquidating a few assets, and rethinking her strategy to ensure her recovery. But all the while, his words about respect and humility echoed in her mind, louder than any financial advice. As the meeting came to a close, Emily felt a mix of emotions: confusion, regret, and an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. She stood up, her hands slightly trembling, and met Alex's gaze. "I've been wrong," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've treated people terribly, and for that I'm sorry. Not just for you, but for everyone I've looked down on." Alex smiled, but it wasn't the smug grin she had expected. It was a genuine smile, one that held no malice, just quiet understanding. "It's never too late to change, Mrs. Weston. You'll have to work hard at it, but it's never too late." Emily nodded, her heart heavy with the realization that her arrogance had cost her far more than money. It had cost her the respect of others, the trust she had once taken for granted. And now, as she left Alex's office, she knew the real work was just beginning. She would have to rebuild her life, not just financially, but emotionally, learning to see people for who they truly were, not by the jobs they held or the clothes they wore. As she walked out of the bank, Emily felt a strange sense of clarity. She wasn't the same person who had walked in just an hour ago. Her world had shifted, and she had a long road ahead of her. But one thing was certain: she would never again look at people the same way. Not after all she had learned. In the weeks that followed her meeting with Alex, Emily slowly began to change. It wasn't easy, and the process was far from smooth, but something deep inside her shifted. Alex's words echoed in her mind constantly. Respect wasn't something you could buy with money, and it wasn't determined by a person's job or appearance. It was earned through kindness, humility, and understanding. She started to pay more attention to the people around her, noticing the little things: the tired eyes of the cashier, the warm smile of the janitor, the quiet diligence of the office staff. For the first time in her life, Emily looked beyond the surface. She began speaking with people more kindly, offering a smile or a word of encouragement where she once would have passed by without a second thought. It felt uncomfortable at first, but each day it became a little easier, a little more natural. Her financial situation, while still a challenge, slowly began to improve. She followed Alex's advice, making the difficult but necessary decisions to restructure her investments and selling off assets she didn't need. There were sacrifices, but Emily was determined to make it work, not just for her bank account, but for her own sense of self-worth. The road was long, but with each small victory, she felt like she was reclaiming something she had lost: her integrity. Months later, Emily found herself back at the same restaurant where she had treated Alex so poorly. She walked in with a sense of purpose, the usual arrogance gone. The restaurant hadn't changed, still elegant, still buzzing with activity, but Emily had. She was no longer the woman who looked down on those who served her. This time, she was determined to show gratitude. When Alex approached her table, she didn't hesitate. "Thank you for everything," she said sincerely, meeting his eyes. "You've been wonderful today." He smiled, clearly surprised by the warmth in her voice, and Emily could see the subtle shift in his expression. As he set the bill down in front of her, she carefully placed a generous tip on the table. It wasn't about the money. It was about acknowledging the hard work and dignity that she had once overlooked. As she stood up to leave, Emily felt lighter than she had in a long time. She wasn't just walking out of the restaurant, she was walking toward a future where respect, kindness, and humility were the cornerstones of her life. It wasn't easy to change, but it was worth it. And as she stepped into the cool evening air, Emily realized that she had finally begun to rebuild, not just her financial world, but her heart. Emily's journey was one of profound transformation. Through the humbling experience with Alex, she learned that true wealth isn't measured by money, but by the respect and kindness we offer to others. Her once rigid view of the world, shaped by arrogance and judgment, slowly gave way to a new understanding. Everyone, regardless of their job or status, deserves dignity. As Emily began to rebuild her life, both financially and emotionally, she discovered that the most valuable things in life weren't things at all. They were the connections, the humility, and the empathy we share. Her story serves as a reminder that it's never too late to change. And sometimes, a humbling experience is the first step toward becoming the best version of ourselves. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed Emily's journey of self-discovery and transformation. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit the like button and leave a comment letting us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear your opinion and how you feel about Emily's change of heart. And if you want to see more heartwarming and thought-provoking stories like this, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an update. Feel free to share this story with your friends or family. Sometimes, a simple story can inspire someone to see the world in a different light. Thanks again for your support, and we'll see you in the next story.